We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip. When it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
This is the fourth episode in our latest season covering missing persons and unsolved homicides across the southeastern United States, and part one of a two-part series. All opinions expressed are the interviewee's own. This series discusses drug and alcohol use, violence, crime scenes, and homicide. Listener discretion is advised. This is the Fall Line. In 2025, Metro Atlanta is a sprawling network of cities and suburbs that spread out across several counties, spilling out much farther than the tight boundaries of the city proper. Technically, Atlanta proper is home to about 500,000, but close to 6 million more of us are crowded around that hub, commuting back and forth and building lives in places like Decatur and College Park, Tucker, Roswell, and Marietta. The list goes on. North and south and east and west, every direction coming with its own story of flight and sprawl and revitalization, and communities connected and cut off by public transportation. Its long story has retold itself plenty of times, in different ways. The New South, Atlanta preparing itself for the Olympics, Hollywood South, where money settles and who has it, and how that shapes a landscape that has had one constant. It's always changing. Atlanta Metro just keeps growing, and what is and is not the city, not so much technically, but in spirit, that's always up for debate. There are areas, especially south and southeast, that have always felt like part of Atlanta, whether or not that was formerly the case. Maybe people will argue with that. Of course people will. That's another hallmark of being from here. But you can't argue that places like College Park or East Point have influenced Atlanta music and history and culture, even if their city limits are closer to the airport than to Freedom Parkway. East Point is in southeastern Fulton County and only about 7 miles south of Atlanta city center. It was named so because it was once the easternmost stop on the rail line. Now it sits close to Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. You probably know that's one of the busiest, and in many years it's the busiest, airports in the world. And it's also a major employer in our area. East Point was also a key area of interest during the 1996 Olympics. Unlike the rest of the metro, East Point didn't have to construct for the games. They've been ready since the 70s, thanks to city officials who created a state-of-the-art facility for its residents. According to their official website, they were inspired after the Munich Olympics to build a velodrome, a cycling arena, in East Point for locals to enjoy and to improve quality of life in the city. And when the Olympics arrived 24 years later, it became a training facility. Instead of sitting as an abandoned remnant of the games, it's a place that the people of East Point still gather today. There's historic preservation and revitalization in East Point, and investment in a massive outdoor shopping center that's quickly become a major earner for the city. And productions like Stranger Things and The Walking Dead are shot in town, just like they are all over the metro. But like anywhere else in Atlanta, East Point has its problems. The suburb has consistently maintained higher than average crime rates than most of the metro. Property crime has been an issue for decades, though, according to East Point Police published reports, crime has generally been on the decline, though there have been spikes, depending on the year. 2023 showed a sharp decrease in homicides. There were 8 in total, with 6 solved. But in 2024, 17 murders were reported, and 5 remained unsolved at the end of the year. We don't know how many of those cases remain open today. There's an ongoing push to address open and unsolved cases across Metro Atlanta, and families and advocates are still drawing attention to cases that never really made a mark in the local media. We mentioned spikes and dips in East Point's homicide rates. 2022, that was an especially bad year in the city, the worst this decade. 28 people were killed. One of the cases that briefly made the news that spring still remains unsolved today. We're certain of that status because the family of the victim brought his story to our attention and asked us to cover his case. They've been waiting 3 years for some resolution. The initial news stories, they were brief. In May of 2022, a man named Princeton Morris was shot in his East Point apartment and found bleeding at the door to his back patio. His girlfriend called 911, but by the time emergency services arrived, he died from his wounds. A $2,000 reward was offered in his case, and then a $10,000 reward. That additional money was supplied by the family. East Point police were seeking information from the public and continuing their investigation. We did reach out to East Point police for this episode, but we did not receive a response. Follow-up stories featured interviews with his mother and his sisters, who begged the public to come forward with anything, any information at all. Princeton's mother, Chandra, told Fox 5, quote, "I don't really think the person understands the magnitude of pain that they caused. They can't bring him back, but I still want to see justice served." Princeton Morris was born in Greenville, North Carolina, and moved with his mother and his sisters to Georgia when he was still a child. His family lived all over the Atlanta metro area, and by the time Princeton was in his 30s, he'd settled in East Point. In May of 2022, he was living in the Lexington Apartments on Kentucky Court, with plans to move soon, to somewhere a little safer. That's what he told his family. He told them that there'd been an increase of trouble in his apartment complex, and that he wanted to move his girlfriend and dog to a different complex in the area. They'd allegedly had problems with a few things over the years, such as mold in the unit, but in recent months, violence was a more pressing concern. It was not something that he told his 3 sisters or his mother much about. The second oldest of his 4 siblings, he tended to play down his problems and put a good face on things. He just didn't want to worry anyone. They only found out later, from a cousin, that Princeton had been specifically concerned about his own safety. But by then, it was too late. Princeton was killed on May 17th, 2022. According to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, his murder was the second homicide in the Lexington Apartments that month. Just a week before, a 21-year-old named Denisha Smith was murdered in the complex by a man named Shelton Cruz Handspike. It wasn't a random killing. And based on what investigators knew about what happened on May 17th, Princeton's murder hadn't been either. Based on reports, Princeton had opened his back door to his killer and spoken with that individual for some time. No one thinks that he would have done so if that person had been a stranger. His sister, Kay, told us that some words were exchanged and overheard. She understood that there was possibly an argument before her brother was shot and the unknown assailant fled. But what was the argument about? Who's responsible for Princeton's death? That's the information that his mother and his sisters Kay and Myra and Divine have been trying to discover ever since. It was not the first time that Princeton had been attacked in his own home. He'd been robbed just the year before, when someone kicked in his door and forced their way in. Princeton was attacked by the intruders, who then stole his belongings. That was one of the many reasons he'd been planning on moving just before his death. As far as his family knows, things were in motion for him to be out by the end of the month. According to his sisters, Princeton always stayed in close contact with his mother, and May 17th, 2022 was no different. She was in North Carolina at the time, visiting family, and he called her for their usual chat. When he spoke to her that afternoon, everything seemed normal. He was full of plans and ready for his next chapter. But that chapter never had the chance to begin. Just hours after they spoke, Princeton's mother, Chandra, received another call. This time, it was Princeton's girlfriend, with the news that he'd been shot in their apartment. Chandra then began a desperate 7-hour drive to try and reach her son. She called everyone in the family. Her daughter Kay, who was on the West Coast, Princeton's best friend and cousin, who rushed to the scene. His other 2 sisters, who live in Georgia, They woke up to dozens of missed calls and the news that their brother had been killed. Princeton Morris's family has spent a lot of time trying to piece together what led up to the events of May 17th. They've attempted to learn more about the investigation, too, because they need to see his murder solved and his killer brought to justice. So far, the residents of East Point have not come forward, but Princeton's family are sure that someone, somewhere, knows something.
I earned my degree online at Arizona State University. I chose to get my degree at ASU because I knew that I'd get a quality education, they were recognized for excellence, and that I would be prepared for the workforce upon graduating. To be associated with ASU, both as a student and alum, it makes me extremely proud, and having experienced the program, I know now that I'm set up for success. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
Like many people who live in East Point, Princeton Morris spent at least some time working at the airport, but most of his adult career was spent in food service. And that didn't surprise his family. He absolutely loved to cook, and he was passionate about feeding those around him. He also loved to garden and to grow things, and he adored animals, especially his dog, Doce. Most of all, though, he enjoyed connecting with people. A big part of that, his sister Kay thinks, came from his need to love and to be loved. It was an essential part of who he was, and one of her favorite qualities in him, but also a vulnerability. Kay thinks it was something that probably began a long, long time ago. He always wanted to protect everyone and to feel secure. To understand Princeton Morris's life, we spoke to his oldest and his youngest sisters, Kay and Divine, for this episode. They offered different perspectives. After all, Kay is the oldest of the 4 children. She and Princeton and their sister Myra were all born in North Carolina, and Divine is much younger. She didn't come along until they'd resettled in Georgia. And Divine was home, living close by to Princeton, when Kay served for years in the military. So, together, they were able to paint a picture of his life over decades, and to tell us about the boy that he'd been and the man he became. We sat down with both women this spring, and Kay began by telling us about their early years in North Carolina, before Divine was born, and when the second youngest, Myra, was still a baby.
Well, first of all, I'm the oldest. He was the second born out of 4 kids. We were both raised in Greenville, North Carolina. I shouldn't say raised because we actually left pretty early, but we lived in Greenville, North Carolina until, I must have been through late elementary school when we ended up moving to Georgia. My mom had actually moved before we did. My mom wanted to better her life. And so she relocated to Georgia to start going to school, but she couldn't take the kids at the time. She had 3 kids, which would be the third sibling is my sister, Myra. She was a baby at the time. And so we stayed behind in Greenville until my mother, was in a good place to bring us. And so that wasn't again until I was in, I don't know, I had to be in like 5th or 6th grade or something. And then later, my baby sister, Divine, was born in Georgia. So my brother was actually clearly very loved as a child. When my mother needed to relocate to Georgia, and she left us in the care of others, my mom was able to find a home very easily for my brother. So he went and stayed with the aunt. My sister and I think she kind of struggled with finding a home for us. And she didn't end up finding us a family to live with. I don't really remember their names, but we didn't stay there long because for some reason, my grandmother came and got my sister and I. And it was, I think, when my grandmother came and got us, I think it just kind of, life definitely kind of changed for my sister and I. My grandmother at the time was on drugs and ended up losing the apartment that we were living in. And we ended up staying actually in a different Motels. It went eventually, of course, from motels because, you have to have money to stay in motels. We ended up living in shelters. After the shelter, something happened one night where the shelter director, yes, kind of someone back and get us by a specific time period. They would have to call different services. And so my sister and I, we lived a different type of childhood, I guess you can say, for a bit from my brother. He was actually, pretty stable still with his aunt. And we, my sister and I was just kind of bounced around a bit. It's honestly kind of surprising, just I guess how we came to be in our adulthoods because again, my brother had the more stable childhood for a while. Things definitely changed for him when we reached our teenage years, but in the beginning, he was in North Carolina, I mean, they loved him, his family just loved him. I honestly, I don't recall seeing my brother when I was in the foster home. My mother came and visited, but I don't recall seeing my brother. So when you're in foster care, you definitely have to work with the caseworker, to get into a situation to where they will allow the kids to come back. And so my mother ended up finding a place after she graduated college, found an apartment, passed all the tests. And so we were allowed to relocate to Georgia to be with her. We're very young at the time, we're kids. When you're a kid at that age, you just bounce back.
When the siblings were able to move to Georgia to join their mother and to live together, it felt good, and it felt more stable. Kay and Princeton got to spend time together just being kids, for the first time in a long time. Later, when Kay was in high school, her sister Divine came along, and she was excited for that. The oldest three settled into stability and normalcy.
My brother and I were older, and so we played video games. Very into video games. He didn't like to share them too much. He likes his time on them, but I remember playing them for so long that I would just get blisters on my thumbs. I think during that time period, I feel like things, from what I can remember, just seemed like a normal childhood.
All three of the older children were in school by then, and they did extremely well. Kay said that Princeton had always been bright, and in Georgia, their teachers and administrators started to take note.
They always said he was very smart kid. I think I remember my mom being excited one time about him having the opportunity to advance a grade level, actually. But for the most part, he was just a normal kid, a normal boy, I should say. Boys can be a little mischievous and trouble. It wasn't until I would say maybe middle school, high school for him where I think things kind of, I feel like just kind of got off track with our childhoods. I think that my stepdad at the time, I think maybe he was just ill equipped for parenting boys. I'm not sure, but it just kind of turned really abusive. And I think it just kept getting worse for Princeton. And I think that that's kind of when he started experimenting with drugs and things like that. And I think he just maybe just kind of wanted to escape. We honestly all did, but if he had the opportunity, he was going to go someplace else, go hang out with a friend, or be at the house as much as possible. And sometimes, he wouldn't come back until, really, really late. But he was always very, very protective of us, very, very protective of his mother. Oh my goodness. I think sometimes that's why things would potentially escalate. But I mean, that was just his nature. He wasn't trying to be the man of the house or anything like that, which is, what I felt like my stepdad was trying to prove to him, that he wasn't the man of the house. He was just a kid.
That's the turning point that Kay can mark in Princeton's life. a kind of before and after. She says that experimentation eventually led to long-term issues with alcohol dependency that would affect him on and off for most of his life. She was aware of his drinking when they were both teenagers, but they were still very young, and she had her own struggles too. Then, a major event occurred that changed the trajectory of her life.
What actually ended up happening was my mom and stepdad ended up divorcing. And so I actually ended up having my son, who's now about to turn 20. And then I end up going into the military. So when I was pregnant, when I got pregnant, I was really young. And so, of course, I was, really embarrassed and not really excited, I guess you can say, to share the news. But my brother, he was a joker. He was always a joker. He had moved out himself, living with some friends. And so we saw less of each other as we had, I guess, started our own lives. But he loved my son. He, especially since he was a boy, he felt like, they can do things in common. My brother was still very young, it's, a teenager. And so, he was still, partying and things like that. But when it came down to do a family visit or something, like that was just all him. But he was the same way with my baby sister too. Like I think he just loved kids. He would always, if I needed to do something, he would always watch my kid. When I went off to the military, he was very, hands-on with making sure that my son got to daycare if he needed to, or making sure that he had someone to watch him. And then, as they got older, he made sure to, they used to play video games together. He was always getting him, my brother used to do little crazy dance moves, and my son would do little crazy dance moves too. And so he was definitely a different person when he was, himself and around family. But I can't lie, if he was, I guess you can say, under the influence of something, he would be a different person. And so I can definitely say that I only preferred, to be around him when he was himself.
Most of the time, Princeton's drinking didn't prevent him from being the same loving brother that he'd always been. And with Kay leaving for the military, she wasn't at home to see his life day to day. Their middle sister Myra wasn't either, because she'd made her own plans.
But my sister, she went off to college right after high school. She went into undergrad, and then right after undergrad, she went into dental school. I think that was just kind of her coping mechanism.
But their youngest sister, Divine, she was still at home. She was still very young when Kay went into the military, and Princeton was there to entertain her and Kay's son, who lived with their mother, Chandra, while Kay served. Divine said that she admired and looked up to Princeton, and she appreciated the time that he spent with her and her nephew. He'd bring over their cousin Richard, who was his best friend, and teach Divine how to play video games. She said she loved his style, really everything about him.
He was really, I guess, like big brother type. Whenever I'm stuck on something, I'll come to him and we would play together, stuff like that. He enjoyed spending a lot of time with us together. We'll play games wherever we're at, online or in the same room or something like that. He'd be wearing some nice clothes, like some nice, good fitted pants. He's a ladies' man. I I know when I was younger, he used to charm all the ladies, all the females. It doesn't matter who it is. If it's he gonna make sure he looks good every day he steps outside. And he's charming too. He's charming. He's smart. He's very intelligent. Like we can have like an intellectual conversation. He's not somebody who's gonna come up to you and not know what to say. He's gonna work with you, I guess. Like feel your aura and go from there. That's that's the type of person he is. I just know that they said that he was really smart, like really book smart. Like he could have gone to any college or whatever. Like there's so many things that he could have, grasp and learn or whatever to do whatever you want. I know at one time, at one point in my life, I wanted to go into the military. And I remember I called him up and asked him, about it's like some type of test you have to take or ASVAB or something like that. And he was telling me like, yeah, I done passed it. I just decided not to go. So I'll go ask him questions about it. But the man is like Google. Like whatever question or whatever, I feel like he knows the answers.
Divine told us that, most of all, she appreciated that she could confide in her big brother. He was someone who would listen and not judge, no matter what.
Yeah, he was very open minded. He was probably the second or third person I told that I was gay, and he never treated me or looked at me different. He always kept an open mind. Like he don't care about that stuff. And I love that about him, that he don't care. He supports you in anything that you really wanted to do. And he'll stand 10 toes down, like he would motivation speech, encourage you, like you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to look up this and this and that. Like he's that type of person. Like he wants you to do great. He wants to, see you at that highest level or something like that. He was always very encouraging with anything that I wanted to do or anything that my sisters wanted to do. He will encourage you to do it. He's that type of person, and I love that about him. He was fun. Outside of him being intoxicated, he could be a different person when he's drunk. But when he's sober, he's he's really calm, nurturing. He really caring and all this stuff. I like that. And I wish I could experience more of that with him.
We told you that Kay was in the military for some years, and that included a deployment in 2008, when the U.S. experienced a significant recession and housing market crash. Her mother was caring for Kay's young son back in Georgia at that time, and Divine was still at home too. Kay and Princeton were in their 20s, and Myra was still in school. If you're too young to recall that time well, the job market was tough, and a lot of people lost their homes. Since Kay was in the military, she concentrated on sending her paychecks back to her mother to support the family. But Princeton, he was hard hit by the lack of work, and he found himself adrift.
At the time that I deployed, the market had actually crashed. My mom ended up losing her job. And so when I was overseas, a lot of the money was tax-free. So I was just, sending money back to help take care of whatever my mom needed for my son, especially. But my brother, he was just kind of, going around between roommates. And then I think for a while he was living with my mom, and he was kind of back and forth, especially after I came back from Iraq. The first thing I did when I got off the plane was I wanted to leave Georgia. So I immediately moved to Charlotte, and I felt bad because my brother, he was brokenhearted, and I didn't expect that, I guess you can say. And so I moved to Charlotte because I thought it would be better. I thought it would be, less stress, less drama. But I ended up moving right back to Georgia, I think, after I graduated college. I don't know. I think that I really didn't start worrying about my brother until, I guess you can say, I was closer to home, and I could really see things with my own eyes. One of the things I was encouraging him to do was to go into Alcohol Anonymous. He didn't feel like he had a problem, but my brother, he had, a bunch of DUIs at the time. He was just being arrested for, being under the influence. I think he was just really struggling to really find his path. And I think that he just maybe just didn't have the right, mentorship and support to kind of change things around for him. I would get angry sometimes because I knew that he could do better, But then the more you learn about alcoholism, you learn that it's a disease, and you know, they do really need help. I think I was just angry at him because I just wanted him to just make a decision and just say, I'm going to get better. But it wasn't that easy. Those are the friends that he had. And so maybe that was a contributing factor. My brother, I'm not going to lie, he trusted everyone. I mean, I think he had such a big heart. I think that he wanted to be friends with everybody. And so he attracted everyone. But the ones that, of course, stuck around the longest would be the ones that would partake in the same activities.
Despite issues that came up with drinking, Kay says that Princeton's love for other people was always evident. We saw that when we found posts from his coworkers at restaurants across Georgia and from his high school classmates on Facebook. When news of his death hit social media, his friends, they all said the same thing. Princeton had a huge heart, and it had room for everyone.
When he made a friend, he normally would protect that friend too. They became family. He was always, bringing around friends that he said they didn't have a home or something, or they didn't have family, or they just needed a plate. So it was a funny thing. My mom was always cooking for somebody that he was bringing over. But yeah, that was my brother.
In the early 2010s, Princeton met someone who would become one of the most important people in his life, his girlfriend. We did not speak to her for this episode, so what we know comes from Princeton's family. According to his sisters, they first connected on social media, and then she eventually moved to Georgia to be with him. And then, by 2017, Kay was living in California with her own family, so she got most of her news about her relatives long distance. She said that Princeton always played down his problems. He liked to keep things positive, even when he was going through issues with drinking. And in the spring of 2022, Kay's conversations with her brother, they were focused on the future. Kay knew that Princeton wanted to move, and soon. He told her that his girlfriend was expecting a child, and that it was time to relocate. As far as she knew, it was about the mold issues and the general worries concerning safety and crime.
Right before he passed away, he was, excited because he was expecting to become a father at the time. He was in his 30s, and so he was ready, really hoping to become a father. He was supposed to be moving into a different home. He just wanted to love, That was his saying. He just wanted to love. And when he loved you hard.
It made sense to Kay. Her brother had always loved children. He'd helped care for Divine and for Kay's own son when he was very young. And now, in his 30s, it felt like Princeton had turned a corner. He was working several jobs to make extra money and was motivated to save up enough to relocate somewhere he felt was safer. Overall, he was still excited and optimistic. Divine told us that Princeton was focused on sobriety too. But when he talked about moving and the dangers of the area, Princeton left out one vital fact. He didn't tell them that his worries about the apartment complex were more specific, that he, personally, might actually be in danger. Princeton was worried enough about his safety that he'd begun parking behind his building, so it was harder to know if he was at home or at work. His sisters and his mother, they didn't know that. They wouldn't find out until afterward, when it was too late. Next time on The Fall Line, we continue our coverage of the unsolved homicide of Princeton Morris and what you can do to help resolve his case. If you have any information in Princeton's case, please call Crime Stoppers Atlanta at 404-577-TIPS or 8477. You may be eligible for a $10,000 reward. If you know of a case that should be covered on The Fall Line, there's a link to our case submission form in the show notes. Thank you for listening. The Fall Line is an independent podcast, and we appreciate listener support. If you try out the products we advertise, please use our sponsor codes. It really helps. And please take a moment to rate and review our show on your podcast app of choice. If you listen on Apple Podcast, Please be sure to check your subscription to make sure you're set for automatic downloads so you don't miss an episode. My book, Lay Them to Rest, is available anywhere you get books and through your local library. Find out more in the link in our show notes. And if you'd like to support the show and the stories we cover, join us on Patreon or Apple Premium. Through both platforms, you can gain early, ad-free access to our episodes. The Fall Line's Patreon and Apple Premium support our Family Therapy Fund and actively pay for therapy for families who've appeared on the show. The Fall Line is written, hosted, and researched by Laurah Norton, with additional research assistance by Melissa Gold. Interviews by Brooke Hargrove. Produced, engineered, and scored by Maura Curry. Content advisement by Vic Kennedy and Brandy C. Williams. Special thanks to Liz Lipka.